Hi class, this is Mrs. Wendt, and these notes are your cell notes part 2, prokaryotic cells. And the goal of this is that you can draw a prokaryotic cell after you view these notes, that you can label the parts inside that cell, and you can label those parts with what job they do. So to do this activity, you need your notes. So either notebook paper or wherever you take your notes. And I highly recommend colored pencils or markers for this. So how we're going to do this is I am going to be drawing a bacteria cell. And we're going to kind of go through the parts one at a time. So I will have the parts and their jobs listed on this page. And I will go to another page to do the drawing. All right, so the first part we're going to draw is the cell membrane. So we're going to go to a new page here, and I have my pen, and I'm going to make the cell membrane green. And bacteria come in lots of different shapes, so whatever shape you end up with, you're probably fine. Okay, so I drew that in green. I'm going to use that same green to label this. So I'm going to do a little arrow here. This is my cell membrane. Okay, now right by where it says cell membrane, you could write right below it here the job. That's going to end up making my picture on the computer kind of messy. So I'm going to have the jobs on the separate page. But if you want to put the job right under the name, that's a great idea. Okay, so the cell membrane, kind of think of it as a water balloon or a skin. And that cell membrane, their job is to protect the cell and to let things in and out, right? There's some things in the environment the cell maybe doesn't want. There might be poisons, or if there's too much salt, or not enough water or something like that. You want to kind of keep track of what's going inside. What are you pushing back out as garbage? The cell membrane is in charge of all of that. Okay. Now around the cell membrane, we have another layer called the cell wall. And the cell wall is for protection as well. And it also gives the cell structure and shape. So structure is like your house has structure with walls and shingles and things like that. So the cell wall is kind of like anchors everything else. It keeps everything else together, holds everything. And the shape, bacteria come in lots of different shapes, if it's a circle shape or a spiral shape. So the cell wall is the thing that determines the shape. The membrane is really flexible, like a skin or a balloon. The cell wall is rigid. It keeps the same shape all the time. So I need to draw a cell wall. So I'm going to choose a different color. And the cell wall is a little thicker. So in my drawing, I'm going to try to make a thicker line. And I probably could have chosen a different kind of pen for this. Actually, I might try that real quick. Oh, look at that. So if I try a highlighter, there we go. So my cell wall is thicker around the membrane. So they don't cross. If you put a little bit of space between them, that's good. Lots of times they're touching directly next to each other, but a little bit of space is fine. Okay, so this is my cell wall outside of the membrane. Okay, so cell membrane is inside, cell wall is outside. So it protects and gives shape to that cell. Okay. Now inside, the most important thing is our DNA. DNA is the directions for making proteins. And we will learn how those directions work in second quarter during Biology B. Okay, so DNA is all the directions for making proteins, which builds all of your body parts. And it's going to look like a big pile of string or yarn, and it is free floating. So I'm just going to kind of make a squiggle shape. And in bacteria, it actually is kind of like a big rubber band where the two ends are connected together pretty often. I'm going to label this. This is my DNA. If you want to add the words free floating, that's excellent, but you don't have to. Okay, so today the DNA is over here on the left side. Maybe tomorrow it's over here a little bit more. It just floats around wherever it goes. Okay, so cell membrane is on the inside, cell wall's on the outside. DNA looks like a big pile of string in the middle. Then we have cytoplasm. And cytoplasm is like the fluid. You might think of it as like a gel, like hair gel, inside the cell. So cytoplasm, fluid inside the cell. Now this can be kind of hard to draw. So I'm going to try something on my drawing since I'm doing it on the computer. This may fail spectacularly, but I'm going to change to a crayon. So I have a really light layer. So cytoplasm is all fills up the cell membrane. So if the cell membrane is a balloon, the cytoplasm is like the water inside your water balloon. So I'm just kind of shading the whole thing in. So if you're using colored pencils, a light colored pencil kind of shading the whole thing works pretty good. If you're using markers, maybe you want to find one pencil or one crayon, or you can just leave it white as well. That's kind of up to you how you want to do that. All right, got to get a label here. Now, that's not going to be a great thing for a label, so I'll kind of add a black thing here. Cytoplasm. Okay, so that's the liquid or the gel that everything else is floating in. Okay, so back to our list here. Next item we have is ribosomes. Ribosomes are our protein builders. So the directions for building is the DNA. So this is like the blueprints or the instructions. These are the workers that actually do the building part. And these guys are just really tiny little dots. So I'm going to pick a different color I haven't used yet. And I'm just going to make some little circles. And they're just kind of everywhere. Some cells have more, some cells have less. In your human body, all of your cells pretty much have a few, but some of your cells have many, many, many more. So these little dots, ribosomes. And again, if you have space and it works out, you can put the job right next to it. Protein builder. Okay, now what we have right here, these are the main parts that every bacteria cell has. Oh, we should label this. This is a prokaryotic cell. Prokaryotic, that's an O, cell. And bacteria are our main examples of prokaryotic cells. Okay, so we have some things now that are optional, that some bacteria cells have and some do not. So let's take a look at that list. Okay, so this list here, all bacteria has. But there's a few other things that only a few have. You saw one in your activity, one called a flagella. That's a long tail for swimming. Another thing that some cells have to move around is called cilia. And you actually have cilia in your throat where when you breathe air in, the little cilia hairs will help push any dust particles and pollen back out of your lungs, and you might have like a coughing or a sneezing to get that out of there, and the cilia is doing that job. So some bacteria cells have a flagella, some have a cilia, and some have neither one. So let's put those in there. Okay. So again, grab a color I maybe haven't used. So I'm going to just put a tail here. And this is my flagella. And then the cilia are a whole bunch of little hairs on the outside. So they could be all around all the sides of the cell. I'm not going to do the whole cell, I'll just do a little section. But they're just little tiny hairs. And remember, this is three-dimensional, not flat. So the hairs would be on the top, the bottom, the fronts, the sides, all the parts, all these little hair. Cilia, C-I-L-L-I-A. And both the cilia and the flagella are used for moving. So you could put the hairs all the way around if you want to. I am lazy, so I will not be doing that. Okay. So flagella, cilia. Another thing that you see sometimes is what's called a pili. And bacteria are not male or female, but they can do sexual reproduction. So if you're doing sexual reproduction, that means you must have two parents. Okay, but in bacteria land, there's not boys or girls, so that's not a thing. But they have to be able to switch DNA. So in humans, how this works is the male has a sperm, and the sperm has DNA, and that goes over to the female, and that's how the male and female DNA come together. Well, for bacteria, they're just going to swap little pieces, and they just have a long kind of straw that does this. So it's not very exciting. So we'll grab a kind of a new color here, maybe this one. And I have a little space over here. It doesn't matter which side you put it on. Okay, remember this is three-dimensional, top, bottom sides, it doesn't matter. But I'm just going to put kind of a long, kind of little tube. Pili, P-I-L-L-I. Okay, and that is used where one little piece of the DNA in this bacteria might go through the tube, and there'll be a second bacteria here connected to it. And they might switch just little pieces of copied DNA. Now, why this is important to us is that's how these guys change and evolve. So if this bacteria gives you strep throat and your body fights it, you should never get strep throat again. However, if you get a bacteria that has new pieces of DNA inside, your body won't recognize it, and you might end up with strep throat a second time in your life. Okay, so by switching pieces of DNA, this is how the bacteria change and evolve. Sometimes when they change, it's harder to find medicines to fight it off. Okay, so that's kind of a big deal. We'll talk more about that maybe later in the year. But the pili is for that sexual reproduction, that sharing of DNA pieces. Whoops, too far there, guys. One more thing that some bacteria have is a capsule. And this is kind of a slimy, snotty layer on the outside of the cell wall for protection. So maybe the bacteria lives somewhere that's really salty or has a lot of acid in there or something like that. And they might need an extra layer of protection because of where they live or other situations. So we could put a capsule around the outside of this guy here. And again, it would go all the way around. I'm only going to put it around part of it here. Maybe I'll go all the way around. Okay. And let's see, running out of places to write, so I'll scroll down a little bit. And my brain doesn't remember how to spell this. S-U-L. C-A-L-S-U. Whoops, that's not right. P-S-U-L-E. All right, capsule, something like that. All right, now this is all the parts of a very complicated bacteria cell. We have some optional parts that not all bacteria have. And if we kind of recap here, we have a cell membrane, like a thin, flexible skin in green. Around that is a purple cell wall for protection and to give them shape. And some bacteria will have a third layer, a snotty, sticky capsule to help protect it. Some bacteria will have a flagella tail for swimming. Some bacteria will have little tiny hairs called cilia for swimming. All bacteria will have a piece of DNA jumbled up inside. All bacteria will have little tiny dots called ribosomes. And all bacteria will have cytoplasm, where the ribosomes and bacteria float. And sometimes in bacteria, you will see a pili used to exchange DNA for sexual reproduction. All right, so this is our bacteria cell. So our goals were that you could draw one of these. And in tests that we do paper pencil, I have my students draw cells and label the parts. It's more likely in a distance model that you will see a picture and have like multiple choices for what is this layer or what is that layer, but you never know. So can you identify what these parts are and what their jobs are? Which things are for protection? Which things are to make proteins? Which things are directions to build stuff? Which layer lets things in and out of the cell? Okay, so that is our bacteria shape. To see how you absorb that information, there is a quiz on Schoology that you should go take. It's short. You can use your notes, and I would suggest you do it right away before you forget everything. This makes the end of our Cell Notes Part 2 video.